Anger and despair about the rising death toll of Australian women didn't just spill out into the streets yesterday, but into very public confusion about who should or shouldn't speak at the rally in Canberra. Somehow that dispute seems to symbolise the confusion about what role government plays in addressing this social trauma, what we need to do as a society as a whole to address it, and why it always seems to be women who have to take the running on it.
We're here today to demand that governments of all levels must do better, including my own, including every state and territory government. We're here as well to say that society and Australia must do better.
What we're seeing right now is a huge spike in domestic and family violence, and we've seen these terrible murders across Australia, and this is a national crisis, and we need to start treating it as such.
The conjunction of mass killings in Bondi, which seem to have targeted women, with a wave of murders of women across Australia, allegedly by intimate partners or ex-partners, has shocked the community and put a particular focus on this most final form of domestic violence. As of yesterday, 27 women had been killed in just the first 4 months of this year, compared to 64 in 2023 and 56 in 2022. Not even the experts are sure what is behind the surge in deaths after a period in which they seemed to have been falling. But what people working in the sector are sure about is that more needs to be done urgently to protect women currently at risk.
For decades, we haven't had the investment or the prioritisation that the sector should see to actually respond to keep women and their children safe.
It's not that there has been no attempt to address the problem. Advocacy groups were heavily involved in the development of the National 10-Year Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, which launched in October 2022. But the plan's broad brush ambitions jar badly against shocking statistics that show that, for example, just in Victoria, domestic violence incidents account for 25% of the offences Victoria Police deal with, and that in that state alone, the police responded to 94,000 family violence incidents in the past 12 months. The plan set out to improve prevention and boost early intervention, response and recovery. It specifically outlined new, increased funding for 500 more frontline workers.
We have a national plan, and the national plan is thorough, but it's only thorough if it's implemented. We need to be ensuring with the national plan we look at the how, we look at the implementation, we look at the monitoring of it, we look at the accountability of that national plan.
And it is the question of expediting immediate protection measures which is likely to form the basis of discussions at Wednesday's National Cabinet meeting, with issues like bail laws already in the spotlight in New South Wales.
The status quo isn't working, and we need to be looking at change to keep vulnerable people safe, particularly as they're awaiting justice.
While governments argue they are trying to roll out an already agreed plan, the pressure to expedite that plan's objectives is now immense, as is the search for leadership.
This is something that requires a response, not just of every level of government, but of the media, of society as a whole as well, in order to change this culture.
Just how to deal with the problem at that level of our entire society is behind the other move today, the expedited release of an issues paper that discusses what reforms need to be made to the Online Safety Act, a piece of legislation that is itself only 3 years old. The online debate will run into the gauntlet of the wider freedom of speech issue, but for people on the front lines of the domestic violence crisis, there are more pressing concerns.
Now, a moment in our lives where we actually saw political leaders marching. The next step is action. So we need more than words now. We need action, we need commitment, we need funding.
Hannah Tonkin is the New South Wales Women's Safety Commissioner. I spoke to her earlier. Hannah Tonkin, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you for having me.
Before we come to the calls for urgent action that we've heard over the last few days, I want to just ask you how much the situation has changed for women. We recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first women's refuge in New South Wales, creating a place for women to escape from violence in the home. That's 50 years ago. How much has changed?
That's right. Last month was the 50th anniversary of the first women's refuge opening. And if we look back over those 50 years, since March 1974, a lot has improved for women. That's certainly clear, but we know that so much more needs to be done. We're still seeing extremely high rates of men's violence against women, and that's been very clear in the most tragic way in recent weeks when we've seen these really horrific murders.
Now, do we understand, that's what these present calls to action have been motivated by, with all of the knowledge that's been acquired over those decades, do we yet fully understand why those murders take place in such high numbers still?
That's a really difficult question, and it's a question that everyone is grappling with all across the country right now. It's a highly complex problem. So we know that when we're talking about domestic and family violence, ultimately it's about power and control. We know that the majority of perpetrators are men and the majority of victims or victim survivors are women. So in most cases we're talking about men exercising power and control over women, and we need to think about how we can address that, how we can prevent that, and ultimately prevent these murders from continuing to happen.
Now, in the near term, we're going to have a convening of National Cabinet and also a convening of a round table from people like yourself from all the states, bringing their expertise together. What are you asking for in the short term to address this crisis of violence?
Well, there needs to be a range of different measures. We absolutely need to see measures in the justice system, and there's been a lot of focus on that lately. In New South Wales, there's a review of the bail laws following recent tragedy, and so that's very important, and we need to think in particular about how the justice system deals with high-risk perpetrators and repeat perpetrators. So that's very important, but we've got to do much more further upstream as well in terms of intervening early, and we've got to do more in terms of providing supports for women and children so that they can leave violence, they can recover and heal in the long term.
Just before we come to what can be done in prevention, just to stay with the notion of judicial reform first of all, you mentioned the fact that there is a review of bail laws. What about apprehended violence orders, AVOs? Is there also grounds for urgent reform of the way AVOs work or don't work to protect women?
That's definitely something that needs to be looked at as well. We need to look at what conditions are placed on AVOs. We need to look at the penalties for breach, and particularly when we're talking about repeat offenders and high-risk offenders. So all of this needs to be on the table, and all of it will be on the table.
When it comes to requests that are coming now thick and fast for greater government investment in prevention, what is it that you would want to see most urgently?
Well, there are many different aspects to this.
And I realise it's a very difficult question because it's a very broad subject, but if you were to ask for that money to be directed quickly, where would it go?
I think we need more emphasis on perpetrators. So much of the emphasis has always been on the woman and the woman leaving, and it's absolutely critical to keep investing in those supports for the women and the children, but we've got to look also at the perpetrators, at who is it that's committing this violence. So looking at not only accountability, that's important, but looking at behaviour change, intervening early for high-risk individuals and high-risk groups. So that early intervention piece is really important, particularly with perpetrators and looking at behaviour change. I would be looking at investing there as well as some of the other things we've talked about.
And is there enough good evidence around programs to change the behaviour of men? They've been around for some time. Do we know whether they work?
No, we don't have enough evidence yet, and that's a problem. So we do need to have a lot more research in this area, and we need to keep trying to see what's working, and we need to be looking overseas as well. So we need to build that evidence base, but we can't wait. We need to keep trying.
And in the meantime, when we're looking at if there are requests for an urgent increase in funding, talking about prevention on the side of the victims and the children who may well be the witness to this violence that we're talking about, is it frontline domestic violence services? Where do you need to see money to be effective in prevention before we're talking about the kinds of events that have so horrified the country in recent weeks?
We definitely need more resources for frontline services, that's clear. But we also need to look at systems changes. So one area where I think we need to look very closely is in relation to information sharing between services and police, and looking at those systems and how we can improve that information sharing. That's really critical, particularly when we're talking about prevention. And we also need to invest much more in the children who are experiencing domestic and family violence, who are witnessing it in their own homes, because if we're going to stop this in the long run, we've got to interrupt these intergenerational cycles of trauma and violence.
And who does that? If you need more workers to do that, where are they deployed?
Well, we'd look at our child protection system, and particularly those early cases in the child protection system where domestic and family violence is first reported. A lot of this also comes through schools, and then looking at the services to wrap around the whole family. So again, supporting that service system.
And you mentioned before that this is in relation to attitudes and how attitudes are formed. You've spoken of the need to intervene when it comes to online harm and what it is that our young people are seeing. How do you do that? Is that the work of the eSafety Commissioner? What do you want to see change in order to protect young people?
I do think the online environment today is extremely challenging, and particularly for boys and young men. Boys and young men are exposed to really extreme online misogyny, often from a very early age, and it's often targeting them through the algorithms and in quite an aggressive way. And in parallel, we're seeing boys age 11, 12, 13 exposed to pornography, often violent pornography, right at that time when they're developing their attitudes about women, about relationships. So all of this is creating a very complex picture. And as you say, the work of the eSafety Commissioner is really important here.
What do parents do if they're worried about their children and what they're seeing and doing and what they may be absorbing? What should they do?
I think it's really challenging for parents, and a number of parents are worried and not sure what to do. So I think having those conversations with your children, with your sons in particular, but also your daughters, that's really critical. They're not easy conversations. They are awkward conversations sometimes. But if we just have open conversations about what we're seeing online, what we're exposed to online, then that's a good starting point for all parents in their own homes.
Dr. Hannah Tonkin, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
And if any of our coverage tonight has raised issues for you, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline 1800 RESPECT on 1800 737 732.